Morning, everyone. Thank you for joining our Tech Talk sessions. Today, our topic is going to be our cybersecurity partner, Claroty. Our presenter will be Ben Jackman, who is one of the account managers for Claroty. He's based out of Central Texas in the Austin market, but he covers Texas, Oklahoma, and some other of the Tola area that a lot of our customer base is in. So we'll be going over a high-level overview of the Claroty portfolio on this Tech Talk. I do want to plug that our next learning series, which is our longer, more in-depth online training sessions that we do. Our Tech Talks are generally 30-35 minutes. Our learning series usually go about an hour and 5 minutes. The next one will be in March. That one will be a little bit more in depth on network products and network cybersecurity, but that will be in March. So this one will just be focusing on Claroty, our cybersecurity partner. We do encourage, if you have any questions, to go ahead and use the question answer function down the bottom in the chat. I will be answering those as Ben is presenting. And if it's anything that we need to go a little bit more in depth, I will go ahead and answer that at the end in an open dialogue with Ben at the end. And I just realized I didn't introduce myself. I'm Brandon Singh. I am the network and cybersecurity specialist for the Reynolds Company. I'm based out of the North Texas area, so I am in DFW. So at that, thank you again, everyone, for joining, and I will hand this over to Ben.
Thanks, Brandon.
Sharon.
All right. So the title today is Finding Your On-Ramp to the Industrial Cybersecurity Journey. Again, my name is Ben Jackman from Claroty, and I'm looking forward to introducing you to our portfolio and the ways that we can help you along this journey. I'll start off with just a couple brief introductions, and then we'll kind of get into the technical side and talk about some of the solutions and capabilities, how those would help you in your environment. And if we do have some time, I have a short demo I can provide as well. Please enter your questions in the chat box, and Brandon will try to answer them as we go. And if we have some to answer at the end, we'll try to answer those verbally. So to start off, I mean, there's no secret to why we're here today and why this has become a hot topic for not just IT teams, but the corporate leaders of the world. Every board of directors and every management team is starting to ask questions as they read these headlines about Colonial Pipeline, Altmar, Honda, meat suppliers. Different things have popped up over the past several years. It all started, decades ago, but it's starting to become more and more prevalent that OT security is hitting the headlines. And obviously, when an OT security event happens, it leads to real consequences, whether that's downtime in the production, meaning loss of revenue, or an environmental concern such as a release or a safety hazard or things like that. And the reason that Claroty exists and the reason that we're here today is that traditional IT security tools are unprepared for this challenge. So there's been a long-standing IT OT divide between the two groups, where the operational technology teams and the IT security teams or the IT teams have butted heads or stayed in their lane for several decades, and we're starting to see this convergence of the IT/OT space. But when you take a traditional IT security tool into the operational space, it typically isn't built for that space, so it doesn't understand some of the proprietary protocols, these unfamiliar assets, and we're running into a lot of legacy systems that can't even run the latest and greatest IT security tools. And that's really where Claroty was born, is to solve this gap or this space here. This is kind of the tip of the iceberg for the IT teams to be able to see some of these unmanaged assets or the unknown and invisible cyber risk to the organization. And then this is really the security journey, the cyber physical systems security journey, as told by Gartner, which is a market research group. So this isn't necessarily a Claroty slide, but more of a Gartner slide of this is what they have seen in the industry and in the world for companies dealing with cyber physical system security, or OT security, is that the majority of companies are still in this awareness phase. As these headlines come out, they're recognizing the need to commit to addressing this security. And then the rest of this journey, the reason I highlight visibility here is that's the bridge to achieving the rest of this journey. It all starts with knowing what's out there. You can't secure what you can't see, and you can't fix, what you don't know is not out there, right? So having that visibility really lays the foundation for the rest of this to address risk, identify your blind spots, start, implementing some security practices and segmentation, and then integrating and optimizing that security in the long term, either with an IT security team or some other partners. And the way that Claroty solutions are built is to help you find your own on-ramp to that journey. Whether your priority is to first understand your network, or to begin controlling access to the environment, or to detect threats within that environment. So we have multiple solutions that can help you as you move from the left to the right on the previous slide. But you can kind of, pick your own adventure or pick your own on-ramp here to address what's important and critical to your organization. And the way that we do this is primarily through asset discovery. That lays the foundation for the rest of these use cases that we can solve for. So you can see asset discovery across the top there really lays the foundation for some of these outcomes that our customers are looking to achieve, like vulnerability and risk management, protection of the network, detection of threats, management of those assets that you discovered, understanding, the life cycle of them, how many of them you have, and understanding changes in the environment, knowing what are good changes and bad changes, and also securing the remote connections and remote access into the environment as well. And we do this with flexible deployment options. You'll see in just a moment. Role-specific user interfaces, meaning role-based access control with least privilege, so that everybody can stay in their own lane and see their own level of details. And it's all integrated, right? So we have integrations with the different various solutions so that you can build upon this journey along the way. This is the how we do that, or kind of the introduction to the rest of the conversation today is the technologies, the solution names. So I put this up front here to explain the various technologies that we're going to go through quickly today. The first two are CTD, continuous threat detection, and xDome. You'll notice that one of them is an on-prem solution, one of them is a SaaS-based solution. And along the bottom, you can see that they solve for similar use cases, right? So asset inventory, vulnerabilities, threat detection are really the primary use cases for CTD and xDome. Both of these are continuous real-time monitoring solutions. The third solution there, called Claroty Edge. This is another software-based tool that we have that's going to provide periodic snapshots of your environment. So if you're looking to get an asset inventory in the OT environment and understand those vulnerabilities, this is the fastest and easiest way to do that. So this is the easiest on-ramp to just solve for that inventory and vulnerability side of things. And then the fourth one there obviously stands on its own pillar as a secure remote access tool. This is a built for OT remote access solution. It integrates with multi-factor authentication, single sign-on. We've built in some OT specific capabilities, like the ability to request and approve access, least privilege access, meaning you can force certain users to only have access to certain engineering stations, not the entire network. and it all gets recorded for auditing purposes. So you can go back and watch the recording. You can terminate sessions at any time. So that's just a brief introduction of the 4 solutions that we'll cover today quickly in more detail, and then we'll summarize that at the end and answer any questions you have. I'll start from the right-hand side, and we'll cover remote access first. Remote access, our remote access tool is built so you can control who has access, what they're allowed to do, what they can connect to, where they can go, why they need to be in there with a request approve process, and you can even terminate the access. So this is allowing you to keep remote users in their own swim lane, whether they're an internal employee or an external vendor or a contractor. You can force them to only have the limited access that's necessary. It all can be controlled by the OT team through the administrative process, including request and approve, giving people even windows of time that they're allowed to provide access to the environment. It does make authentication easy. It's got a lot of integrations with single sign-on, so you can log in with your IT credentials, and then you don't even have to remember the OT credentials. We can do secure password vaulting so that once you're into the platform, you can enter into the engineering stations without needing to remember all the different passwords down there. You also have secure file transfers down to into and out of the OT environment. And of course, all the sessions get recorded for auditing purposes. Now, from a technical perspective, the way this works is essentially it's a 2-box approach. These can be virtual machines or physical devices, but we create a secure tunnel between the two. One of them is the central component and the other is the site component. So you may have, multiple site components, but just one central component. That central component is where the administration is done. Things like, authentication and user control is done there. And then on the site component, that's where it's actually going to connect locally on the local subnet to the assets that you're reaching. A remote user would typically log in through a web browser, log into the central component, and choose which site and which computer he's trying to hit. Now, the way this looks like through a couple levels of firewalls or, with some different things here is obviously, one of the reasons that we built this is it eliminates, multiple holes in your firewall and a lot of the network configuration hassles that exist when you need to provide emergency remote access to a contractor or a remote employee. So the solution is there already. It's already got a secure tunnel down into the operational environment where you can provide either SSH, RDP, VNC, or web browser interface directly into wherever you need to go. We do cover multiple use cases. The first is, logging in through a web browser. So the way that it works, your local computer or laptop, you don't need to install anything on it. You just launch a web browser and connect to this central SAC component. The second one is a VPN over SSL capability, where you can actually run a solution like Rockwell's engineering software on your laptop and go through that engineering software through a VPN SSL tunnel all the way down to the PLC. So it's like you're sitting next to the PLC with a direct connection. And then the third one is the secure file transfer capability. So we know there's always a need to, sometimes transfer files in and out of the OT environment, and that can be difficult, and it can introduce certain security risks as well. So we have a way to scan those files for malicious malware before they get sent down, and then it all can go through the same interface. This does also fit within the Purdue model. If you're familiar with the ISA or IEC 62443 kind of asset classification Purdue model here, this is an overlay of the SAC central component and the site component and where those might live within your Purdue model. Again, we have native multi-factor authentication and password vaulting, and we support least privilege role-based access control. Now we'll move into Claroty Edge. In the interest of time, I'm just moving really quickly here, but obviously if you have questions, enter them in to the chat and reach out to us for a deeper dive on some of this. So Claroty Edge is, again, this is a software-based tool that's going to provide a snapshot of your environment. We can run it periodically, but this is the easiest and fastest way for you to get an OT inventory. We pull that OT inventory into either the CTD dashboard or the xDome dashboard. It can also match those assets down to the vulnerabilities that are associated with them. So it'll discover everything about those PLCs, what firmware version they're using, what serial number they have, what's on those rack slots. In most cases, whether it's a Windows device, it'll also pull in what installed patches are there and what other software is installed on those Windows computers. All of that helps you provide more awareness and an accurate full OT inventory. So if you're still living in the spreadsheet world or not even in the spreadsheet world, this is a way for you to have a living asset inventory that you can run periodically and make sure it stays up to date. The way it works is we have a lightweight Windows executable that'll run typically on like an engineering station, and this will do the asset discovery. It's not a persistent file, so it doesn't need to be installed. There's no service account that has to be installed or anything like that. It doesn't leave any persistent changes behind. And it'll generate an output file, a results file that we can take either to CTD or xDome for you to analyze and view that inventory. Now with Claroty CTD, this is stands for Continuous Threat Detection. The reason that we have Claroty CTD and what it enables you to do is to understand who's on your network and who's talking to who, what devices are out there, what protocols they're communicating, know when something is changing on that network. If you have a new rogue device jumping onto the network, or somebody is speaking a new protocol within your network. We also have ways to tell you and inform you where you could do some network segmentation or improve the network a little bit, where and why you have the risk in your environment and how you can improve that. So obviously this builds off of that Claroty Edge OT inventory by listening to the network and using some other OT discovery and information tools. Now we have a living OT inventory that's going to continuously update, right? It's not a snapshot anymore, or not a periodic snapshot. It's real time. If you're unsure where to start with network segmentation, this is a great way for you to blueprint the network and understand what's out there, what groups of assets you have, and where you could apply some network segmentation policies without breaking anything. If you also want to know, whether you've got some malware in the environment or whether you've got some, malicious threats or malicious external connections, that's all part of it as well through the threat detection piece. The way that Claroty CTD works is we have several different collection capabilities. The first is passive through a span port or a port mirror, which means we're able to listen to your OT network without necessarily joining or participating in the network. So we don't have to put any packets on the network. We can simply sit to the side and listen to that network and be able to build the inventory based on what we're hearing on the network. We understand those protocols through, and we provide deep packet inspection of those protocols to enumerate the assets and match certain communication patterns with known threats out there or anomaly-based threats. Through a number of partnerships with people like Rockwell and other OT vendors, we have really amazing OT safe queries where we can ask a Rockwell device a CIP query to get a specific bit of information about it without broadcasting a scan across the network. We're just doing kind of one-time queries to pull in a bit more information. And Claroty Edge is also a capability that can augment the data and shine a light on additional assets in your network. So you'll find that with passive, it does require a managed switch, and it does require a managed switch that has an extra port available. And in many of the OT networks that we run into, that may not be the case. And so that's why we built Claroty Edge, is to help either augment, make it easier, or provide more information about those assets in certain islands of automation or areas of your network which are invisible to the passive monitoring. Application database, AppDB, is a way for us to also get more information about your PLCs and things like that using project file parsing. The way that the CTD architecture looks through the Purdue model here, the main component is right in the middle, called the CTD server. This is the only required component. You might need a CTD sensor down below if you want to expand the way that CTD server can see. If you want to expand its reach throughout your either geographically dispersed or the number of listening areas within the network that it's going to reach. That's the reason to have a CTD sensor. Typically, whenever we're architecting this, we're looking at a multi-phase approach. The first is a north-south monitoring. And then, within the Purdue model, knowing what's coming in and out of the OT environment. And then the second phase is, how wide do you want to go east-west, right? How low can you go within the network in terms of understanding which PLCs and HMIs and things are communicating with each other at the lowest levels, that east-west communication. And then the third component up here is called the Enterprise Management Console. That's only required if you have multiple CTD servers, which may mean that you have multiple sites. The use cases that CTD is solving for, again, are asset discovery. So this is going to provide a lot of information about those assets, not just whether they're an OT asset or an IT asset, but what vendor are they? Are they a PLC? What model number PLC? What serial number is it? What firmware is it? Allow you to have that full visibility of what's out there. And we support over 300 different protocols in order to understand that. Those are OT specific protocols that we have deep packet inspection understanding for knowing what's happening on the network. The second use case or capability here is called risk and vulnerability management. Obviously, vulnerabilities are a critical piece of the puzzle when it comes to risk, but that's not the only kind of risk, right? So there's several different kinds of risk that we can identify in your environment, whether those are unsecured protocols, whether those are remote connections using RDP, whether they are end-of-life assets, whether there's external communications or ghost assets on the network. We classify the risk in I think like five different categories here that you see on the right. And each asset will get a risk score, as well as the overall site will get a risk score. And then these insights here will help you quickly, be able to click and see what are the most risky assets and where you can solve and manage that risk. And in terms of network protection, this is another capability we have, and another thing that you'll be able to see. Again, this is the blueprint of your network laid over a virtual Purdue model, right? So you're able to classify the assets and see who is talking to who across this Purdue model. So you understand where you could do network segmentation, where you have lines of communication that look like they are improper or going across too many layers. So if you have an OT device speaking directly to the internet, that'll show up here. And then you can use this to help you figure out how to do segmentation. So we will build within the tool virtual zones and recommend areas where you can segment and group assets. And then the next use case is threat detection. So obviously the name of the game, or the name of the product here, is Claroty Threat Detection, continuous threat detection. So knowing and discovering when there's malicious activity. So if it's a known threat, that would be detected using something called a signature or a snort or YAR rule. So we'll be able to detect ransomware moving within the environment or different viruses moving within the environment. We also detect zero-day threats, meaning an unknown threat or a new emerging threat, and that is through more of anomaly-based detection capability. So knowing what's changing, what's suspicious, and alerting you based on that. This can all integrate up to a security operations center or a SIM platform as well for other managed security services or threat hunters to monitor the alerts and manage that for you. Now I'll jump quickly into a quick xDome demonstration. This will be really a high level, one or two use cases here that I'll be able to cover within the next 5 minutes. But I wanted you to be able to see Claroty xDome, which is our SaaS-based solution that solves for a lot of the same challenges that CTD is built for. So right off the bat, what you see here is an inventory. In this case, we have 3,609 devices that's classifying them across OT, IoT, and IT and telling me how many of them have risk, how many of them have been compromised, what manufacturers I have, what protocols are communicating on my network, and things like that. If I have multiple sites, this is where I would be able to choose, to look down within a certain site. If I want to only look at the OT assets, I can look at just the OT assets and start to see some of the manufacturers that you might be familiar with there, as well as some of the protocols that you might be familiar with on the OT side of the house. The other thing we can do really easily is add another widget here to the dashboard. And what you might want to see is the total risk by the site. So we just clicked on that, and now we can see the site risk across all of my sites. So I've selected all the sites, and these are the site risk scores across the enterprise. You can, drag and drop this into a different spot, create a custom dashboard, and publish that for other users in your environment. Once you start drilling down into the assets, it's very similar to some of the screenshots you saw from CTD. So these are the OT assets. I've got 1,084 OT assets. You can add multiple attributes in here, such as the firmware version, so that then starts to show up in the available details here. You can also look at the highest risk assets and start to see which ones you might be most interested in. So if we take a look at one of these assets here, this is a Siemens PLC running a firmware version 4.2. This is the model number of that PLC. And I can even see some of the rack slot information of that asset, what firmware and model number those rack slots are. Obviously, it's going to give you some information about alerts for that asset, vulnerabilities for that asset. And it'll also map out where it's communicating within your network. The vulnerabilities are a big piece of what's important from a risk perspective. So this dashboard will filter the vulnerabilities that are matching to your environment. So we'll match those vulnerabilities to the model number, the firmware, and in some cases the serial number, and give you the information for those CVEs and let you know if there's a patch available. In this case, we're looking at the actively exploited vulnerabilities. This is a list from the US government CISA catalog, known exploited vulnerabilities, which are the most important for you to address. How the risks are scored is shown here on the risk configurations. So we have 3 different risk factors: the severity or the criticality of that device, how exploitable it is, where it is in the network, and then how vulnerable it is, the different kinds of vulnerabilities for that asset. We also do threat detection in here, so you can see some external IPs that things are communicating with. This is the network signature threats that we're finding. We map all of that into the MITRE attack framework here so that you can see the alerts based on where they are within the MITRE framework. And then one of the really great additions within the xDome platform is this network ACL policy place here. So this really helps with network segmentation. And what we'll do is we'll recommend policies for groups of assets. So this is a PLC group of 76 devices. And these 76 devices, we recommend 12 rules based on the communication that should be happening within those kinds of devices. You can export this ACL list to a network access solution or a firewall. And then if you want to test that policy out within your environment and simulate it, you can do that here by generating an organizational policy and starting to observe that traffic. You can see what would have been denied, what would have been allowed, and even see a chart of all of those different protocols within your environment and which ones are red, meaning they would have been blocked by that ACL policy. So you can apply some network policy without breaking something. This is a great way to see that. But that's it for the demo. Let me jump back into a couple closing slides here. If you haven't seen Claroty's Threat Research Team 82, I would recommend hitting our website and looking up some of the information from them. They continue to publish the most vulnerability disclosures in the world for any team in the ICS space. And one of the ones that I recommend reading or watching is called the Evil PLC Attack. So there is a white paper and a podcast and I think a video from DEF CON last year that covers this attack. That's it for today. I think we do have some time for questions. And I just wanted to leave this as, kind of the takeaway slide, as these are the different capabilities and use cases and the different product names. So if you have any interest in further discussion about these, don't hesitate to reach out to your partners at the Reynolds company like Brandon, and we'll have a conversation about your environment. Brandon, do we have any questions today?
We don't have any. We had one question that was asking about on the export of ACLs, would Hirschman managed switches be supported? I've already answered that. Yes, the Hirschman managed switch are supported, as well as all your other big name switch manufacturers, Stratix, Cisco, HPE, Aruba, Dell, Palo Alto Firewalls, Juniper, all of your major players within the network infrastructure space, they're all supported.
All right. Thanks, Brandon, for the opportunity. And again, let me know if anybody has any more questions. Feel free to reach out to us or Brandon at the Reynolds Company.
So without that, thank you everyone for joining. And we look forward to seeing you next month on our learning series. Thank you again. Bye-bye.